starting. And I'll keep letting people in if you want to kick us off, Kim.
Perfect. I will. Well, welcome everybody again. Thanks for joining us today to talk with our special guest, who we will get to in just a minute. Just a reintroduction to those of you maybe that I haven't met or haven't seen in a long time. I'm Kim Stodghill. I'm an independent counselor living in Birmingham, Alabama, but my business is primarily based in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm sort of all over the Southeast for the most part. And I have been co-chair of this committee for a year and a half, I think. Time is sort of running together. But a longtime member of SACAC and happy to be trying to help this group find ways to become more of a part of this organization and to get our needs met and to have the type of resources that will help us improve what we do. And hopefully this webinar is one example of that. And I'm really excited about our conversation coming up. Real quickly, I just want to ask, most people have their cameras off, so I won't even ask you to raise your hands, but I'm hoping, I guess I'll say it, that many of you have registered for the conference in Atlanta and that you're planning to attend. I also hope that some of you have actually put in proposals to do a presentation and wanted to make the announcement, the offer that if anybody needs help, tap into this community. If you feel like you just need some extra ideas and resources, I feel like this is a great way for this group to network with one another. And then, quite frankly, if you need some help presenting, if there's somebody in this group who maybe is interested in jumping on board with that, depending on what area of expertise you're trying to cover, we could certainly you can drop some things into the chat if you're trying to find somebody like that, however you want to communicate, or if you want to reach out to me or to Taylor after this meeting and let us know kind of what you're looking for. Maybe we can help make some connections from within the group. But I think as we try to advance what this group is doing, I think it's really important, if you can be in attendance, that you come to SACAC, especially if you've never done it before. Some of us are new in this group, and I just think you will learn what is out there for us and what the resources are, and then can also provide us with feedback on perhaps what do you wish had been there, and what can we then maybe share with the board and things like that, or what can we even present on the next time if something is missing in an area that we're looking for. The other thing I'll just put in a plug for real quickly is volunteering. It is how I got started with SACAC many, many years ago. It's how I met so many wonderful people. And if you are planning to attend the conference and you have the time and the energy, just even volunteering at registration is a great way to say hi to people as they're checking in. But certainly the outreach program, which I think is on Saturday, typically it is, the outreach program that they do is an amazing event that really every year we're in a different place, different location, working with different populations, but it's a great way to be involved and help the community as well, giving college advice to those who don't always receive it. So if you have any questions, especially about the volunteering side of things, I'm happy to talk about it. I've tried almost everything under the sun within the organization, and just I think it's a great way to meet people and network. And with that, I'll turn it over to Taylor.
I had to move my mouse to unmute. I was ready to keep letting people in. Hey everybody. It's good to see y'all. We're not saying Happy New Year anymore, but I think we're all off to a great start, hopefully. I wanted to give an update about the conversation we had last time related to the common application. So Kim and I have been desperately emailing often some folks, both on the advisory committee, as well as some other colleagues, just to see if there's somebody that could come to our meeting based on the feedback that we got last time. We're having a hard time getting some yeses. So what we thought was, all right, instead of beating a dead horse, why don't we work off of compiling some questions, and maybe we can find a way to theme them, drill them down a little bit further, so we're not giving them, 150 questions about, the Common App. But why don't we as a group compile some of the concerns, some of the confusion, some of the suggestions that we have as a group, and give them to folks that we know there. That way they've got time on their own to respond to us. We're we're finding that that might be the best option for us. So we want to make sure that you guys know that we're trying to get a voice in the conversation, but it's going a little bit slower than we had hoped. So Kim and I will work on creating a Google form that we can send out to the group as a whole. We can capture some voices. We'll leave it open for a couple weeks. You guys can submit things that you know, have been burning to ask or are curious about. We'll try our best to categorize them and clump them together. We'll send them off and see if we can't get a response for everybody. So wanted to give an update on that. And again, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. Taylor Florio, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm an independent college consultant with EWC College Counseling. All right. And we've got a great topic today. I'm very excited about this. We were thinking about, you know, timeliness and with the push of the Common Application conversation. You know, now is the time of the year where we get a lot of questions about course selection and, you know, what kind of rigor we need to stack up. And we're finding that, you know, there's always rumors being spread in schools of what they should do. There's rumors being spread about what colleges are looking for. We all have maybe had experiences sitting on the reader side of the desk. And so we have our own opinions. So we said, let's bring in some experts on this topic who actually sit in admissions offices and are still reading to this day, and wanted to just have an open, positive, constructive conversation about what is the current climate and current trends on course rigor, course selection. We have a few questions that we wanted to prompt our guests with, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we can get the conversation started. The one thing that I will say is, please, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. I'm going to be watching them throughout this conversation so that as Rob and Holly can, you know, answer and share their experience and their knowledge, we can pepper them with things. And if there's something that wasn't able to be answered, we can always shoot them over to them in an email. And if you have time, would love for some thoughts and feedback after the meeting. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over. Rob, how about you go first, and then Holly, you can introduce yourself after that.
Sure. Good afternoon, or good morning still. My name is Rob. I am the Assistant Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at Duke. I use he, him pronouns. Um, I've been at Duke for 2 years now. I have been working in college admissions for about 8 years, all here in North Carolina. I attended Wingate University as an undergraduate and Appalachian State for my master's. And then I've worked at Davidson, Elon, and Duke, so all in admissions. So I feel like I know this area pretty well, and I'm excited to kind of put our brains together and have a good conversation today.
Hi, all. My name is Holly Springfield, and I serve as the Assistant Director of National Recruitment here at Auburn University. And so I have actually spent my entire professional career at Auburn. So I've 15 and a half years in college admissions. And so I got connected with Kim and Taylor when I was a road warrior in the Carolinas. And so spent about 7 or 8 years as a regional recruiter before I took on this role as assistant director. I moved back to Auburn in 2020 and so currently, you know, lead that national recruitment piece for Auburn. So I was excited when Taylor reached out to connect with you all and hopefully just share some insights. So.
I love it. Thanks, guys. I think the way that we should start this out is maybe not with a direct question, but do you guys either have initial thoughts on this topic and like what has been the buzz in the office related to course selection, course rigor, and how you guys are reviewing applications these days? Let's start with that, and then we can maybe trickle in some more specific questions.
Yeah, sure. I think this was my office was really excited when I kind of threw this topic out there to get feedback. Part of my role in the office, I oversee all of our recruitment footprint within the Carolinas. And so I sit in on all of our Carolinas admissions committees. I primarily evaluate and review applications in the Charlotte Triad regions. And so I've gotten to see a lot of kind of the North Carolina curriculum over the past couple of years, as have a lot of my colleagues. And I think maybe one of the trends that we've seen with North Carolina specifically is the Project Lead the Way courses and kind of how we encourage students. And then also in that same breath, kind of, dual enrollment AP courses, how students are being encouraged to access those, but then also what that looks like once they get into college and how colleges are viewing those. So I think that's maybe been the larger arching topics of a lot of the smaller conversations.
Yeah, and for us in our office, I think the conversations around, course selection and course rigor, we have had conversations about, what obviously kind of the same questions that you're getting is that, what's the best pathway moving forward. And for us, I think a lot of the common responses that we share with students are that we want them to challenge themselves, however they are able to within the realm of what their opportunities are. I know working at a large public institution, the conversations around course credit with like dual enrollment compared to AP and IB credit can be vastly different in terms of what we would take as an institution. So it's kind of a tailored conversation that we have with students and families, depending on the opportunities that they have available to them with their schools, and understanding what that student has the ability to handle themselves.
So on that note, you kind of teed this up for me, Holly. One of the first questions we wanted to ask is, there's always that conversation with families of what's going to look better, AP, IB, or dual enrollment, right? And we all kind of, I think as counselors, we know better to not just choose one, right? It's definitely an it depends situation. But my thought is like, is there a more effective way to counsel students through that response, knowing that maybe Auburn would take a AP, class at one credit, whereas Duke might not, et cetera. Like, how do we as counselors, if we're not equipped with that information, what is the best way to navigate slash, are we seeing a shift in those things? Like, is AP and dual enrollment becoming more of like competitive with each other? I don't know. I'm kind of like expanding now, but would love to just hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, looking at an Auburn with an Auburn lens, it's one of those things that it makes it hard because it is, I feel like the answer is it depends. Because I have talked, even in my time working directly with students, that I have conversations with a lens of large public. We accept a lot of dual enrollment credit. We're pretty explicit. We have a transfer course equivalency table on our website where students are able to look up their institution that they did their dual enrollment from and see what that course will transfer over to if they end up enrolling at Auburn. And so a lot of the conversations that I have and that my staff have are, when looking, because we view AP and IB, they're obviously rigorous courses, and dual enrollment is as well. They're taking college level credit. But it's the conversations oftentimes of, are you wanting to challenge yourself? Are you taking these courses with the intention of, am I trying to earn additional credit? Maybe to help offset costs in the future, finish your degree a little bit earlier. Or are you wanting to take the AP or an IB rigorous course load because you feel like you can handle those challenges? Is it more important to, go ahead and get that guarantee of, if I pass that class with, an A or a B, can transfer that course over and it's going to apply to my curriculum. Obviously that is at a lens of a large public. And so it truly, because we value, we as an institution, I think we weight all of them the same in terms of that. So it just, I hate it, but I feel like the answer is that it depends. And I think it depends on what your students that you're working with, knowing the schools that they attend, what courses are available to them at their school. Because we look at, when we're reviewing students, we review in relation to the high school, what is available at the high school, because there are students that will attend large public high schools that you can start taking AP courses freshman year. But then there are others, another student you may be working with attends a school where they limit the amount of AP, maybe you can't enroll in those until your first one your sophomore year, and then max 2 junior year. So we look at it in the lens of what's available at the student's school too.
Yeah, and I won't reiterate all of what Holly said because I think you hit on a lot of the kind of big questions that come out of it. I think for me, Duke is similar in the vein of we're only evaluating students in the context of their high school and what's offered to them. But as far as kind of how we are, what we're doing with that credit and how we're evaluating it, I don't, and I'm just kind of a realistic type of thinker. And so I don't ever see that all institutions are going to accept credit the same way. And so I feel like we have that responsibility to make sure we're communicating with students how we evaluate and what we're going to do with that credit because it does look different everywhere. And so I think we need to obviously make that information more accessible and available. But as far as with the Duke lens, we do weight those the same, and we really are looking in the context of what was the student offered, what were they able to take. I think maybe a layer that I would add on for Duke is just that I've seen in our process, we are very empowered in our process to make sure that we are looking and evaluating the students' specific circumstances and saying, yes, these are trends within the high school. Maybe a lot of students are taking the AP, but we also know, at a certain level, students in an all honors curriculum doing exceptionally well are prepared to still come to Duke and do well. And so if there are other components of that student's application that are appealing for us, that's certainly something we would lean in for. Again, that kind of goes off of it depends, I guess. And so it's case by case. What are they most interested in studying? Is that a more common area in their school that students are pursuing? And so there's more availability there. But I think between us making that information more available and then also encouraging students and maybe even counselors on that end to talk with students to say, how can we make sure that we're explaining this in our application of why we chose the curriculum that we did. I always appreciate when students kind of give us more information of like, yeah, I could have taken this and this, but I really like this and I chose that. And we make sure, that is always something that we bring into a committee room because we always say like, we don't want to, draw the line between two dots. We want to make sure that they draw that line for us and tell us this is why I did it. We don't want to have to connect those for them.
So on this note, and I know you can't speak to other institutions. You guys only work where you work, right? But if you could like take your hat off of your institution and maybe like given your best conversation input on this, like with the growing number of applications at certain schools, with popularity kind of shifting from institutions, how intentionally are profiles being looked at when reviewing classes, right? So obviously, depending on what type of readers you have, depending on what kind of committees you have, like there might be folks that have been in a territory for years, and so they do know those high schools like the back of their hand. But when it comes to, I was forced or I was required to take an AP or IB course and I wasn't prepared for that, and so I didn't do well, like how would you say admissions officers are we still being intentional in reading those profiles? Again, this is kind of bleeding into like a broader conversation, but our original question was going to be about, is it still just a tally mark of AP, the end? Or are schools really looking deeper into those profiles or things being communicated in that review process? And again, I know you can't really speak to the broader public, but would just love to hear if you've had those conversations with other admissions folks or maybe within your own office.
I love to speak to other colleges, and I just always say in my experience because then I'm like, well, I was there. I do. No, but seriously, I think it I, I, for us, I think at Duke specifically, we are definitely looking at the profiles. And in fact, during our committee process, there is a designated individual in the room that anytime we're getting to a new school group, they're, the person has already reviewed the profile when they're reviewing the applications, but just for the sake of conversation, they're revisiting that to make sure that, things are not like, oh, well, actually, I can provide context. I'm reading it right now. So we do take that very seriously. And I would say that maybe has trended at more selective institutions where I still see that as an really important piece. And then maybe at, other schools where it's not they're not as selective, or programs are not as competitive. I think it maybe has just become the tally mark of, let's just tally them up, and it all will balance out, and or it all come out in the wash kind of thing. But yeah, for us specifically at Duke, we do still utilize that profile.
And I think to add on to that too, trying to look at it as a non-Auburn lens of like what we do, but thinking of what you would hope that most institutions do, is that if your student, if the school has provided that school profile, whether or not they are, utilizing outside readers, or maybe it's a committee based, or their admissions counselors are reading, that information is part of that essentially application packet that is being utilized as they review that student, or that area, that high school, because it is a resource, especially as I have experienced with our committee-based review. I have the background. I know my schools in North and South Carolina. I grew up in South Carolina, so I had that familiarity. But then recruiting for those two states, for as long as I did, I have the background, so I can, give a quick peek and see, okay, well, you're there at this school, I'm familiar, I know the rigor, I know how challenging those are, and you don't get that everywhere. So the hope, is that having that school profile to be able to give context is essential in that review process, because I can't, nobody can guarantee that every single reader will use it, but hopefully, whether it's, like I said, the committee based, or it's on file, so that way, as questions come up and their discussions are happening with your committees, you can pull that up and be like, well, this school, has only this available. I don't know.
We had,
Just
oh yeah,
oh,
sorry.
sorry. I was going to say,
would,
just to
yeah,
add
go
on
ahead. Go ahead.
in our notes, at both Davidson and at Duke, with our reading processes, I can share, like, our note-taking process includes pulling information from that school profile. And so I think that's an important piece to note too, that is still part of our note-taking process.
Somebody had asked, what if the profile is out of date or maybe hasn't been updated? How proactive do you feel like offices are with picking up the phone, sending an email saying, hey, is this all still the same, or it's been 4 years? Thoughts on that?
I mean, I know that with just the internet obviously ready, available, if I find that what we have on file is not up to date, I'll definitely hit up their website to see if maybe they've just had it posted and what we have in our records isn't. So trying to be proactive that way. So that's kind of what I've done in the past.
I'll be completely honest with you. I just now thought about this because I'm not sure if it's automatically loading if we have one already, or because every application I read has a profile. And so I'm not sure if it was an old one. I'm looking at it, but I do know that part of our process with our admissions intern is going through during the summers to see which profiles or information hasn't been updated and trying to get updated information. But that's a great question that I'll be honest with you. If I know the school, or like in this area, especially maybe independent schools where I know things might look a little bit different, I think I'm probably guilty of, if it's a public school and I'm not double checking, I'm assuming. So yeah, probably should do better with that.
It's hard to keep track for sure. I want to jump back to a topic, not on this, but what we touched on a little bit ago before we get to out of the way. But when it comes to a student who does have an offer to take a specific class on an AP level, but chooses to go and do it at their local community college through dual enrollment, are we looking at that in depth of like why, or like what if the student doesn't choose to disclose why they chose that? Like how is that reviewed from an admissions office? Is it viewed differently? I know we kind of touched on it, but it was a more specific question that somebody posed, and I thought it'd be good to maybe drill down a little bit. Did that make sense?
Yes. I mean, looking at it from an Auburn lens, in that um, we look at rigor, whether it's a dual enrollment or an AP, we've seen that they have taken the initiative to challenge themselves with a higher level class, knowing, and obviously going back to using school profile and knowing that they have the opportunity to, to take dual enrollment or AP. Our assumption is that they have taken what they feel the best course load that they can handle. So that's kind of how we look at it, and how honestly I would even advise students from an admissions counselor standpoint of, what you can handle academically in terms of the course load, and it may be other factors that have played into that the dual enrollment course allowed them to work part-time, because they needed to save money for college. So like I feel like so much comes out in terms of, as we review an applicant, because we're going to pull other pieces in addition to that kind of the course load selection kind of challenge.
I think for us, and totally agree with all of what you said. I think when we see, and it is very popular in North Carolina to see students moving into the dual enrollment courses. I think if without the student explaining, unless they say why, I think we typically assume they're going for an associate's. They're trying to graduate, see if they can transfer in, save money on the uh, long end. But I think there's obviously a number of reasons why any student would do that. And so Holly made great examples of all of those. And so we take those into context too. But I think specifically in a question that I just saw someone ask was really, I know that some students take a DE course in place of AP Lit because they think it is easier. And so when specifically there's an AP course, that is sometimes something that stands out to us. We really want to see, in that case, maybe more of a balance. And I say that just because we have seen in the past couple of years such a huge jump to just full junior, senior year DE courses. And so then those students no longer really stand out or become competitive in the pool because that's now the trend. And so, yeah, I mean, again, not to say it depends because that's the annoying answer, but if I'm being honest, I do think that we've seen that shift over towards DE, and it's not really a curriculum shift that aligns the best for a student to be prepared for Duke. And I think similar selective independent colleges are thinking that same thing. And so I'll give you my honest kind of assumptions of what we're hearing on this end. But with that said, we're contextualizing that student, and we know if that's what they view as the most rigorous, challenging, we're going to take that into context too.
All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Someone had asked earlier about foreign language, and obviously we've had the minimum requirement forever and ever, amen. Most times schools, if you need that extra year, they make it well known. But with just like life in the world becoming more global, are you guys finding that more foreign language is looked highly upon, even if they're not going to be majoring in like an international business or foreign language studies? Like, would be curious to know your thoughts on that.
I will say Auburn is, in terms of our incoming freshman course curriculum, and you look at kind of what we require, even in our course curriculum requirements, there's not even a foreign language on there, which is kind of crazy. So it's suggested and encouraged one. So I always, the way for us, and once again, it's an Auburn lens, large public, research university, that our core curriculum doesn't across the board include a foreign language for every single one of our majors. Really, it's just more commonplace for our College of Liberal Arts, and that will have a foreign language requirement as part of it. So I always encourage the students that I work with that, one, it's a great experience for them to learn if they have the opportunity to take foreign language, and to meet whatever their state requirements are to graduate and receive their high school diploma. But it's, they can continue to pursue that if they have an interest in it in college. But for us, it's not something that we say, oh, you've got to have 2 or 3.
Yeah. So, and I was reading comments, so I think I might have missed the first part. So if I don't answer this fully, call me out. But we require, we're looking for 2 foreign language credits, world language credits, to be admitted to Duke, but we're obviously looking at whatever your high school graduation requirements are. We would still like to see world language there. And then we require students to get 2 additional world language credits while they're here. And that's across the board for students. Did I answer that?
Yeah, you did. I was
Okay, good.
I was
And
working towards my unmute.
I
Go ahead.
think, I think, I think also looking at it just kind of across the board depends on the types of schools that your students may be applying to, or have an interest in. And so if they are looking at more liberal arts based, colleges, then I think encouraging them to pursue foreign language, because more than likely that will be part of their course curriculum. Large publics, maybe, like I said, like for Auburn, we don't necessarily have that as part of our common, core curriculum. So I think that can also factor into it.
I just had this conversation with a student last night. Her mom was like determined to have her add another Spanish, and I was like, do we need it? Have we looked at like what? Like, I don't know. It's kind of like it depends, right? And our job as counselors to ask the right questions and challenge the right things. Rob, was there any question that you saw that you wanted to answer, or do you want me to pickle you with something else?
Oh no, you're welcome.
Since
I
you were
sometimes
looking.
when I'm looking, I'm like, okay, I was just look because I notice people are making comments and I'm like, yes, okay, yeah, this is so if I'm liking your comment,
Yeah. This might be it depends question too, but somebody had asked about, if their school offers IB, but the student chooses not to take, the IB diploma, is that something that is being considered when looking at the profile in the review, or is it, we just want to know that the student made the best decision for them? I don't know. This might be an easy answer, it might not, but I wanted to make sure that question got answered.
it feels easy to me not to dismiss it, but I would say I have lots of students. It doesn't negatively affect if I see that there's an IB curriculum offering and they're not on it. I still want to see them challenging themselves, but they don't have to be IB. And just because I do see a student that is all IB doesn't mean they're automatically gonna, come in as the academic top of the group. So yeah, I think again, context.
I would echo everything that Rob said. Yeah. Um, it doesn't negate it. Because once again, each student knows what they are able to handle. And hopefully, as they're deciding on these courses, and they meet with their families, and they talk about course selection. I have always said, I want your students to challenge themselves how they can be challenged and know where they can be successful. If that is, they know they can handle the challenges that go along with, and being in an IB program fully, or I need to not enroll in that because I know that the course level and how much work I have to put in for that, I'm just, I won't be able to handle that, and I'd rather be successful in maybe and challenge myself in other ways, versus thinking even just that I need to be in this IB program and then not doing well, because we want those students to set themselves up best for success, however success looks for them.
This kind of brings up another point related to I just took honors classes kids, right? Like they know their lane, they stayed in it, they excelled. With growing, competition and with holistic review, it is hard for a kid who knew their strengths and knew their weaknesses and pursued honors and crushed it, but then is stacked up against a student who maybe was better equipped with AP courses or maybe did better. I don't know. How is that playing into review and decisions from your perspective? And you can definitely speak with your lens of your institutions on this one.
I mean,
Sure.
I think for us, because we are part of we are part of the list of institutions that have seen just a drastic increase in applications over the past 5 years. So it's made it challenging, because for us also looking at it, that there are strong students that at the end of the day, because of space and numbers, we just aren't able to offer admissions to. And so it's trying to find the students that will be able to handle the challenges academically at our institution, but also what are the other pieces of who they are as a student, who they are as a person, and what those factors would make them a successful Auburn student, insert other college. I think that's the hope across the board. I think with college admissions, we're always going to have disappointed folks when decision time comes out, and that there's no tried and true answer of how we can pick the best every single time, and just hope that what we're picking and looking at is has the has the ability to be a strong and successful student at our campus. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yeah. Um, I think for us, I mean, we have the narrative, we always say we have over 50,000 applications and 1,500 spots, and the overwhelming majority of students who apply to Duke are academically qualified to attend. So, of course, we're looking at the other areas, but I think it if it when I'm talking with families and I'm kind of trying to give them you know, inside tip, like you're talking with me, hopefully you can walk away and feel this was beneficial. I always like to say, use impact. I think for us, yes, students, we are very fortunate. This comes from our dean. He always says we're fortunate that we have the responsibility of choosing the interesting from the qualified. And so a lot of that, we're seeing students that are academically qualified, and that doesn't, you all know this, to be academically qualified doesn't mean that you are the valedictorian. You can be academically qualified and still be in the top 20% of your class, and taking a challenging curriculum and doing well. But we also want to see those students that are demonstrating impact in some way. And we say that because impact is something that can look different for everyone. Impact doesn't just belong to the elite. It doesn't just belong to students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I think impact is something that students can create in big and small ways, whether you are just picking up your siblings from school and every day you're working with homework, and your impact is my mom can get home from work and make us dinner and not stress about that. And it keeps our family going. Or your impact is I created a 501c3, Rob, and I made this bionic arm that has now gotten a patent. Those two things look very different, but they both demonstrate impact. And I think in our pool, we have a ton of students that are just at the top doing well, more than normal, but it is not something that is distinctive in our pool. And so we're looking to those additional forms of impact that a student can demonstrate and talk about in their application.
Thank you. I know that's tough, especially like Auburn getting just real popular real fast. The superlative. Okay, we did have a question related to like students getting credits in middle school and then not opting into, like a world language or certain courses in high school. How is that looked at in the review process? And what do you feel is the best way to advise just the early getters?
Can I
Yeah, I was
also add,
actually,
like, I'm
Oh,
sorry to interrupt, but also add this layer of it that they might get tracked early in middle school and then can't even take certain APs. So it's almost the opposite. Like they might be the late bloomer who was on a math track and isn't going to make it to AP calculus, but because they decided that in seventh grade. So kind of two ends of that spectrum, maybe the advanced kid versus the kid who got behind. How do you account for that?
yeah. So I think in the first scenario, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm used to the North Carolina transcripts, but in most cases we see those on the transcript, so we count that. And to the question with the foreign language credit as well, we count that as well. Again, those are not you can actually see the exact requirements that we're looking for a student to be admissible. As far as English language or English, math, science. But at the end of the day, the student has to meet the graduation requirements of their high school to be admissible. So we would still evaluate them and look at that. But then your second question was kind of about the student that maybe got behind on APs and maybe is trying to catch up towards the end, right?
Essentially, and Karima, you asked the question, so feel free to jump
Oh
in
yeah,
if you
let me
want
see.
to clarify. But it's kind of like and this happens a lot, especially, well, it did in the independent school world that I worked in. We decided early on what math a student should take in like seventh grade, because they were a seventh grade boy, and then they got better and better, but they still were never going to be on track to make it to like AP calculus at senior year, something like that. And again, Karima, please jump in if I'm not articulating what you're asking, but we worried like you set them up for what that track is so early. We
Mhm.
couldn't always accurately predict how they were going to grow over that course of time. And how can we maybe explain that even for them in those situations, that application kind of thing.
Thanks, Kim. I just want to say, I can't speak from the high school counselor side because I haven't been on that side of the desk, but I just know I'll start working with a kid who's a sophomore. And it happens at some high schools more than others where the kid is doing really well, but they were advised, whatever that means, that's what they tell them. They were advised to not take on too much rigor at the start of high school. So maybe they get limited, and instead of taking 4 or 5 honors classes that maybe they could have handled, they only take 2. But then once they're on the non-honors track, then that's going to eliminate the possibility for them to take APs down the road. So I'm just wondering if you take that into consideration at all, because in some ways it's out of their control.
Yeah, I would certainly take something like that into consideration. It's not something that has come up on my radar, honestly. And so that'll be something that I kind of take back to our Carolinas team to see if they've seen that too. But I noticed some of y'all nodding your heads too. So I'm assuming maybe other folks are having that experience. But yeah, I think that's definitely something we take into context. I would say maybe the closest thing to that we are looking at is like a band student, that they automatically get that at limited rigor because they do have maybe band takes up 2 of their courses. So we talk about that, and there's been many times when someone, a comment like, oh well, what did, and the counselors, we all know like, oh well, they're in band, so they're not able to do that. So I feel like we would definitely want to advocate for our students in cases like that. So I will take that back, but I have not had any personal experience with that, but definitely would want to lean in with a student there.
And I think for once again with an Auburn lens, but we look at patterns of grades and how they've challenged themselves. And because there's not, for us, it could be, even though to your point of, they only took 2, even though they could have, handled the challenges of 5, we still look and see, okay, well, you've taken those 2. How did you perform in those courses? And use that context to help us, best review that candidate for a decision. For us looking at patterns of grades that they've had, if there were upward trends, kind of to the point of someone who started, to Kim's point, of somebody who maybe started out in a, not quite getting to the AP calculus, but have seen that progression over time of maybe how they've improved and challenged themselves. We look at that as well. So.
I was going to say too, we do ask counselors to let us know in our school report if they limit APs, and that does come up. So as far as limit, if a school limits APs, we do see that and recognize. But yeah, good to know that kind of that limiting is getting more and more popular.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder for us, at least on the independent side, to encourage students to have their counselors reach out with additional information because God forbid the profile's not being looked at or, something got missed or there's not an opportunity to state it on the app. Like it's a good reminder for sure. All right, we have about 14 minutes. So I think I want to like make sure that I'm not skipping over questions, but asking ones that I know we have time to answer. Regarding, well, actually, this was a good question that I'm actually curious to know. Would you say that you all, or maybe admissions office in general, are familiar with the difference between students that choose IB diploma versus the career tracks, and how has that looked? And I don't know if it depends or doesn't depend on the major that they're choosing, but would love to hear a little bit about the distinction, the difference, etc.
Holly, I'm not sure if you want to take that or not, because I'll be honest with you, I've just learned about the career placement option one. And so I'm when I'm looking at it, I'm always thinking the IP or IB diploma candidate option. So I'd love for maybe someone to share more about what students are accessing with the career plan.
Rob, I'm kind of the same way. I think I've heard about the career program, but when in my experience and interactions as I chat with students and parents, if they talk about IB, my initial gut mindset is, okay, well, you're in the IB diploma. So I've heard a little bit about it, but I would also agree with Rob of tell us more.
Deb, go ahead, jump in.
Thank you. And thank you both for being here. It's really a treat to have this opportunity. So the IBCP program is very big in Florida. And it may be spreading to other parts of the country. I'm not familiar, but basically the diploma program is as you know it, and the CP, it's career prep is the terminology, is not quite as rigorous, meaning that there's a lower requirement in terms of the HLs that are required. The extended essay is replaced with a reflective project. And theory of knowledge is not part of the curriculum. So there's some curriculum differences. They're both rigorous. They're both excellent. But in terms of really examining the rigor of one versus the other, they have different purposes. And so I know that it's kind of like a Florida thing. And like I said, I don't know how far widespread it is, but that's why I asked the question if you were familiar with it or heard with it, because my experience is that admission folks aren't. And that's great for the CP students, and the DP students are like doing a little bit more. So, but the CP student is really appropriate for so many students also when they're still highly accomplished and would still be candidates for your institutions. So that was the reason for my question. Thank you for this time.
I definitely learned something new, so thank you. Go ahead, Kim.
Oh, I thought about when you're in your intro, Rob, you were talking about Project Lead the Way classes, and that's just sort of been a topic, and certainly it comes up with students I counsel in North Carolina a lot. And so I'm curious, beyond it just being a topic, can you share at all what sort of like what's the angle you all have about those at this point?
Yeah. So it's really popular amongst engineering, STEM, Pratt, or students going into our Pratt School of Engineering. And it's really just kind of been, I think before students were really struggling within their curriculums to identify like, hey, I'm a STEM student, like I want to go engineering. And without going maybe too rigorous. And with the project Lead the Way, those are great rigorous courses. But we've seen students really jump in on that curriculum. And I think just the conversations in our office amongst other counselors has been that they'd like to maybe see a little bit more balance with AP or IB, not just a full project Lead the Way. But we've loved them. I think they've been a great way for us to really identify kind of in a large school group where students' academic or career passions are kind of lining up. So that's just been the overwhelming conversations we had. And when I threw it out to the group today, that was one that came up.
And I think for us, when we see those types of classes, Project Lead the Way, career prep, anything like that, especially if it has allowed a student to Rob's point of kind of guide them into their interest of engineering, as when we're reviewing a student and we're looking at it and we see, okay, they actually have taken these courses, to kind of go ahead and give themselves the familiarity and knowledge, entry level knowledge of that field. That can definitely benefit us to be like, well, they truly have an interest in this program and, have a good, strong foundation because they've got this basis to prepare them to get into our program. So that's kind of how we look at that as well.
All right, I think we have time for one more. So I'm going to ask one that's a little bit of a different topic. But oh gosh, I almost lost it. Y'all are getting busy in the chat. I like it. Okay. It's related to the SAT or ACT. So how will your colleges evaluate students who take the ACT but opt out of the science section, or those who take it digitally versus those who take the paper test? And we'll end on that note.
Yeah, I like that one. So I did say we'll accept the digital and paper test, but we'll require students to take the science section of that. But we'll accept the digital version, and we'll do super scoring as well.
Robert, can I just jump in to ask you a question about that? 'Cause
Absolutely.
I'm not sure how much admissions reps are aware, but the digital test is not the same as the paper test this year. And so the kids who take the digital test have more time per question than the kids who take the paper test. So this concerns me because they're not equivalent, but if colleges are seeing them as equivalent.
Have they outlined what differences other than the times that they'll have?
Yeah, I think it's, God, don't quote me on this. I think it's something like somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds more per question, maybe 5 and 7. But the point is, if you have more time per question, it's not the same test, right? And besides the fact that certain sections are shorter, right? The content isn't changing, but there are other changes to the test. That's just one that I'm pointing out. So my concern is that college admissions offices may not be aware of that nuance, but it'll make a difference if you're comparing kids, right?
It's not a nuance that I was aware of. And I'll be honest with you, just knowing our Dean Christoph, that is a nuance he probably would have brought up when we talked about that. So I'll definitely speak with him about that, because I do know that we've announced that we were accepting the digital version, but we have not had conversations about how that was different. And so, yeah, thanks for letting us know that.
I think for us, I don't know if we've had conversations yet at a leadership level, or at least not to my leadership level. I'm not part of the bigger conversations, but I anticipate that those are conversations that we'll be having. And it's a good point to know about, to make sure that I at least have the opportunity to bring that up in discussions when we have them.
Love it. Well, I've been writing down the questions that we didn't get to. So I'll compile those and send them over. There's not that many. But definitely thank you for Rob and Holly to come out and share their expertise. I know it's so hard to speak unbiasedly, but also like for the good of the order, mixed with like your own opinions, your own experience. So I think just having this conversation is nice to keep a pulse on what's happening. And I mean, great conversation related to new IB, trends, ACT trends, et cetera. It's just good to have these conversations. So I want to remind everyone, we don't have a date yet for our next meeting, but we'll absolutely be sending that out with plenty of notice. Keep an eye out for the Google form for questions that we can pose to the Common App folks. And then just a reminder, if you are attending SACAC or presenting at SACAC and need support, help, or want to find ways to get involved, please let Kim and I know. I think it's a great opportunity to cross-pollinate. If anybody needs co-presenters or subject matter or ideas, let's use each other as a community and be representative like we always are at the conference. But with that, I just want to say thanks and hope you guys have a great day. If it's raining where you are, stay dry. If it's not, enjoy the dry weather because we're about to get pelted, I think. Thank you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, and Kim says bye. She had to go. I forgot to say that.
Kim has left the chat.
Yeah.
Did you